Welcome to the Everything History podcast for episode 43, Ammianus Marcellinus, book 14, sections 6 and 7. In the first passage I read from Ammianus Marcellinus' Res Gestae, I covered the first 5 sections of his 14th book, the first of which that survives to us. Section 1 detailed the many faults of Gallus. 2 addressed the incursions of the Isaurians within Roman territory. Section 3 was a short passage about how the Persians of the Sassanids failed in a plot to invade Roman Mesopotamia. Section 4 explained who the Saracens were, and Section 5 explained the pitiful downfall of Magnentius.
I discharged my last duty as king and emperor.
This is Everything History.
Everything you hold worthwhile is at stake.
We meant more to kids than Jesus did, or religion at that time.
I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth.
Section 6. The Faults of the Roman Senate and the People. Meanwhile, Orphetus was governing the Eternal City with the rank of prefect, and with an arrogance beyond the limit of power that had been conferred upon him. He was a man of wisdom, it is true, and highly skilled in legal practice, but less equipped with the adornment of the liberal arts than became a man of noble rank. During his term of office, serious riots broke out because of the scarcity of wine, for the people eager for an unrestrained use of this commodity are roused to frequent and violent disturbances. Now I think that some foreigners who will perhaps read this work, if I shall be so fortunate, may wonder why it is that when the narrative turns to the description of what goes on at Rome, I tell nothing save dissensions, taverns, and other similar vulgarities. Accordingly, I shall briefly touch upon the reasons, intending nowhere to depart intentionally from the truth. At the same time, when Rome first began to rise into a position of worldwide splendor, in order that she might grow to a towering stature, virtue and fortune, ordinarily at variance, formed a pact of eternal peace. For if either one of them had failed her, Rome had not come to complete supremacy. Her people, from the very cradle to the end of their childhood, a period of about 300 years, carried on wars about her walls. Then, entering adult life after many toilsome wars, they crossed the Alps and the sea. Grown to youth and manhood from every region which the vast globe includes, they brought back laurels and triumphs. And now, declining into old age, and often owing victory to its name alone, it has come to a quieter period of life. Thus the venerable city, after humbling the proud necks of savage nations and making laws, the everlasting foundations and moorings of liberty, like a thrifty parent, wise and wealthy, has entrusted the management of her inheritance to the Caesars, as to her children. And although for some time the tribes have been inactive, and the centuries at peace, and there are no contests for votes, but the tranquility of Numa's time has returned, yet throughout all regions and parts of the earth she is accepted as mistress and queen. Everywhere the white hair of the senators and their authority are revered, and the name of the Roman people is respected and honored. But this magnificence and splendor of the assemblies is marred by the rude worthlessness of a few, who do not consider where they were born, but, as if license were granted to vice, descend to sin and wantonness. For as the lyric poet Simonides tells us, one who is going to live happy and in accord with perfect reason ought above all else to have glorious fatherland. Some of these men eagerly strive for statues, thinking that by them they can be made immortal, as if they would gain a greater reward from senseless, brazen images than from the consciousness of honorable and virtuous conduct. And they take pains to have them overlaid with gold, a fashion first introduced by Achilles Glabrio, after his skill and his arms had overcame King Antiochus. But how noble it is, scorning these slight and trivial honors, to aim to read the long and steep ascent to true glory, as the bard of Ascra expresses it, is made clear by Cato the censor. For when he was asked why he alone among many did not have a statue, he replied, quote, I would rather that the good men should wonder why I did not deserve one, than, which is much worse, should mutter, why was he given one? Other men, taking great pride in the coaches higher than common, and in ostentatious finery of apparel, sweat under heavy cloaks, which they fasten about their necks and bind around their very throats, while the air blows through them because of the excessive lightness of the material, and they lift them with both hands and wave them with many gestures, especially with their left hands, in order that the overlong fringes, and the tunics embroidered with party-colored threads and multiform figures of animals may be conspicuous. Others, though no one questions them, assume a grave expression and greatly exaggerate their wealth, doubling the annual yield of their fields well cultivated, as they think, of which they assert that they possess a great number from the rising to the setting sun. They are clearly unaware that their forefathers, through whom the greatness of Rome was so far flung, gained renown, not by riches, but by fierce wars, and not differing from the common soldiers in wealth, mode of life, or simplicity of attire, overcame all obstacles by valor. For that reason the eminent Valerius Publicola was buried by a contribution of money, and through the aid of her husband's friends the needy wife of Regulus and her children were supported, and the daughter of Scipio received her dowry from the public treasury, since the nobles blushed to look upon the beauty of this marriageable maiden long unsought because of the absence of a father of modest means. But nowadays, if as a stranger of good position you enter for the first time to pay your respects to some man who is well-to-do and therefore puffed up, at first you will be greeted as if you were an eagerly expected friend. And after being asked many questions and forced to lie, you will wonder, since the man never saw you before, that a great personage should pay such marked attention to your humble self as if to make you regret, because of some special kindness, that you did not see Rome 10 years earlier. When, encouraged by this affability, you make the same call on the following day, you will hang about unknown and unexpected, while the man who the day before urged you to call again counts up his clients, wondering who you are and whence you came. But when you are at last recognized and admitted to his friendship, if you devote yourself to calling upon for 3 years without interruption, then are away for the same number of days, and return to go through with a similar course, you will not be asked where you were, and unless you abandon the quest in sorrow, you will waste your whole life to no purpose in paying court to the blockhead. And when, after a sufficient interval of time, the preparation of those tedious and unwholesome banquets begins, with the distribution of the customary doles, it is debated with anxious deliberation whether it will be suitable to invite a stranger, with the exception of those to whom a return of hospitality is due, and if, after full and mature deliberation, the decision is in the affirmative, the man who is invited is one who watches all night before the house of the charioteers, or who is a professional dicer, or who pretends to the knowledge of certain secrets. For they avoid everyone learned and serious, as unlucky and useless. In addition to which, the announcers of names, who are wont to traffic in these and similar favors, on receiving a bribe, admit to the doles and the dinners obscure and low-born intruders. But I pass over the gluttonous banquets and the various allurements of pleasures, lest I should go too far, and I shall pass to the fact that certain persons hasten without fear of danger through the broad streets of the city and over the upturned stones of the pavements as if they were driving post-horses with hoofs of fire, as the saying is, dragging after them armies of slaves like bands of brigands, and not leaving even Sannio at home, as the comic writer says. And many matrons, imitating them, rush about through all quarters of the city with covered heads and closed litters, and as skillful directors of battles place in the front dense throngs of brave soldiers, then light-armored troops, after them the javelin throwers, and last of all reserve forces to enter the action in case chance makes it needful. Just so those who have charge of a city household make conspicuous by wands grasped in their right hands, carefully and diligently draw up the array, then, as if the signal had been given in camp, close to the front of the carriage all weavers march. Next to these the blackened service of the kitchen, then all the rest of the slaves without distinction, accompanied by the idle plebeians of the neighborhood. Italy, the throng of eunuchs, beginning with the old men and ending with the boys, sallow and disfigured by the distorted form of their members, so that, whenever anyone goes, beholding the troops of mutilated men, he who would curse the memory of Queen Semiramis of old, who was the first of all to castrate young males, thus doing violence, as it were, to nature, and wresting her from her intended course, since she, at the very beginning of life, through the primitive fonts of the seed, by a kind of secret law, shows the ways to propagate posterity. In consequence of this state of things, the few houses that were formerly famed for devotion to serious pursuits now teem with the sports of sluggish indolence, re-echoing to the sound of singing and the tinkling of flutes and lyres. In short, in place of the philosophers, the singer is called in, and in place of the orator, the teacher of stagecraft. And while the libraries are shut up forever like tombs, water organs are manufactured and lyres as large as carriages, and flutes and instruments heavy for gesturing actors. At last we have reached such a stage of baseness that whereas not so very long ago, when there was a fear of scarcity of food, foreigners were driven neck and crop from the city, and those who practiced the liberal arts, very few in number, were thrust out without a breathing space. Yet the genuine attendants upon actresses of the mimes, and those who for the time pretended to be such, were kept with us, while 3,000 dancing girls, without ever being questioned, remained here with their choruses, an equal number of dancing masters. And wherever you turn your eyes, you may see a throng of women with curled hair, who might, if they had married, by this time so far as age goes, have already produced 3 children, sweeping the pavement with their feet to the point of weariness, and whirling in rapid gyration, while they represent the innumerable figures that the stage plays have devised. Furthermore, there is no doubt that when once upon a time Rome was the abode of all the virtues, many of the nobles detained here foreigners of free birth, by various kindly attentions, as the locust eaters of Homer did by the sweetness of their fruits. But now the vain arrogance of some men regards everything born outside the pomerium of our city as worthless, except the childless and unwedded, and it is beyond belief with what various kinds of obscurescence men without children are courted at Rome. And since among them, as it is natural in the capital of the world, cruel disorders gain such heights that all the healing art is powerless even to mitigate them, it has been provided as a means of safety that no one shall visit a friend suffering from such a disease, and by a few who are more cautious another sufficiently effective remedy has been added, namely, that servants sent to inquire after the condition of a man's acquaintances who have been attacked by that disorder should not be readmitted to their master's house until they have purified their persons by a bath. So fearful are they of a contagion seen only by the eyes of others. But yet, although these precautions are so strictly observed, some men, when invited to a wedding, where gold is put into their cupped right hands, although the strength of their limbs is impaired, will run even all the way to Spoletium. Such are the habits of the nobles. But of the multitude of lowest condition and greatest poverty, some spend the entire night in wine shops, some lurk in the shade of the awnings of the theatres, which Catullus, in his idolship, imitating Campanian wantonness, was the first to spread, or they quarrel with one another in their games at dice, making a disgusting sound by drawing back the breath into their resounding nostrils, or, which is the favorite among all amusements, from sunrise until evening, in sunshine and rain, they stand open-mouthed, examining minutely the good points or the defects of charioteers and their horses. People watching. And it is most remarkable to see an innumerable crowd of plebeians, their minds filled with a kind of eagerness, hanging on the outcome of the chariot races. These and similar things prevent anything memorable or serious from being done in Rome. Accordingly, I must return to my subject. Section 7. Atrocities and Savagery of Gallus Caesar. His lawlessness now more widely extended, Caesar became offensive to all good men, and henceforth showing no restraint, he harassed all parts of the East, sparing neither ex-magistrates nor the chief men of the cities, nor even the plebeians. Finally, he ordered the death of the leaders of the Senate of Antioch in a single writ, enraged because when he urged a prompt introduction of cheap prices at an unseasonable time since scarcity threatened, they had made a more vigorous reply that was fitting. And they would have all perished to a man, had not Honoratus, then Count-Governor of the East, opposed him with firm resolution. This also was a sign of his savage nature, which was neither obscure nor hidden, that he delighted in cruel sports, and sometimes in the circus, absorbed in 6 or 7 contests. He exulted in the sight of boxers pounding each other to death and drenched with blood, as if he had made some great gain. Besides this, Besides this, his propensity for doing harm was inflamed and incited by a worthless woman who, upon being admitted to the palace, as she had demanded, had betrayed a plot that was secretly being made against him by some soldiers of the lowest condition. Whereupon Constantina, exulting as if the safety of her husband were now assured, gave her a reward, and seating her in a carriage, sent her out through the palace gates into the public streets, in order that by such inducements she might tempt others to reveal similar or greater conspiracies. After this, when Gallus was on the point of leaving for Hierapolis, ostensibly to take part in the campaign, and the commons of Antioch suppliantly besought him to save them from the fear of a famine, which, through many difficulties of circumstance, was then believed to be imminent. He did not, after the manner of princes whose widely extended power sometimes cures local troubles, make any arrangements or command the bringing of supplies from neighboring provinces, but to the multitude, which was in fear of the direct necessity, he delivered up Theophilus, consular governor of Syria, who was standing near by, constantly repeating the statement that no one could lack food if the governor did not wish it. These words increased the audacity of the lowest classes. And when the lack of provisions became more acute, driven by hunger and rage, they set fire to the pretentious house of a certain Eubulus, a man of distinction among his own people. Then, as if the governor had been delivered into their hands by an imperial edict, they assailed him with kicks and blows, and trampling him under foot when he was half dead, with awful mutilation tore him to pieces. After his wretched death, each man saw in the end of one person an image of his own peril, and dreaded a fate like that which they had just witnessed. At the same time, Cyrenianus, a former general, through whose inefficiency Celsey in Phoenicia, as we have described, was justly and legally tried for high treason, and it was doubtful by what favor he could be acquitted, for it was clearly proved that he had enchanted by forbidden arts a cap which he used to wear, and sent a friend of his with it to a prophetic shrine, to seek for omens as to whether the imperial power was destined to be firmly and safely his, as he desired. At that time a twofold evil befell, in that an awful fate took off Theophilus, who was innocent, and Cyrenianus, who was deserving of universal execration, got off scot-free, almost without any strong public protest. Constantius, hearing of these events from time to time, and being informed of some things by Thalassius, who, as he had now learned, had died a natural death, wrote in flattering terms to Caesar, but gradually withdrew from him his means of defense. He pretended to be anxious, since soldiers are apt to be disorderly in times of inaction, lest they might conspire for Gallus's destruction, and bade him to be satisfied with the palace troops only, and those of the guards besides the targeteers and household troops. He further ordered Domitianus, a former state treasurer and now prefect, that when he came into Syria he should politely and respectfully urge Gallus, whom he had frequently summoned, to hasten to return to Italy. But when Domitianus had quickened his pace because of these instructions, and had come to Antioch, passing by the gates of the palace in contempt of the Caesar, on whom he ought to have called, he went to the general's quarters with the usual pomp, and having for a long time pleaded illness, he neither entered the palace nor appeared in public, but remained in hiding. He made many plots for Gallus's ruin, adding some superfluous details to the reports which from time to time he sent to the emperor. At last, being invited to the palace and admitted to the council, without any preliminary remarks, he said inconsiderately and coolly, "Depart, Caesar, and know that, if you delay, I shall at once order your supplies and those of your palace to be cut off." Having said only this in an insolent tone, he went off in a passion, and although often sent for, he never afterwards came into Gallus's presence. Caesar, angered at this, and feeling that such a treatment was unjust and undeserved, ordered his faithful guards to arrest the prefect. When this became known, Montius, who was then quaestor, a spirited man but somewhat inclined to moderate measures, having in view the public welfare, sent for the foremost members of the palace troops, and addressed them in mild terms, pointing out that such conduct was neither seemly nor expedient, and adding in tone a reproof that if they approved of this course, it would be fitting first to overthrow the statues of Constantius, and then plan with less anxiety for taking the life of the prefect. On learning of this, Gallus, like a serpent attacked by darts or stones, waiting now and trying to save his life by any possible means, ordered all troops to be assembled under arms, and while they stood in amazement, he said, barring and gnashing his teeth, quote, "Stand by me, my brave men, who are like myself in danger." Montius, with a kind of strange and unprecedented arrogance, accuses us of being rebels and as resisting the majesty of Augustus, no doubt in anger because I ordered an insolent prefect, who presumes to ignore what proper conduct requires, to be imprisoned, merely to frighten him." End quote. With no further delay, the soldiers, as often eager for disturbance, first attacked Montius, who was lodged close by, an old man, frail of body and ill besides, bound coarse ropes to his legs, and dragged him spread-eagle fashion without any breathing space all the way to Caesar's quarters. And in the same access of rage they threw Domitianus down the steps, then bound him also with ropes, and tying the two together, dragged them at full speed through the broad streets of the city. And when finally their joints and limbs were torn asunder, leaping upon their dead bodies, they mutilated them in a horrible manner, and at last, as if glutted, threw them into the river. Now these men, reckless to the point of madness, were roused to such atrocious deeds as they committed by a certain Luscus, curator of the city. He suddenly appeared, and with repeated cries, like a bawling leader of porters, urged them to finish what they had begun. And for that, not long afterwards, he was burned alive. And because Montius, when about to breathe his last in the hands of those who were rending him, cried out upon Epigonus and Eusebius, but without indicating their profession or rank, men of the same name were sought for with great diligence. And in order that the excitement not cool, a philosopher Epigonus from Cilicia was arrested, and a Eusebius, surnamed Pittacus, a vehement orator, from Edessa, although it was not these that the quaestor had implicated, but some tribunes and forgers, who had promised arms in case of a revolution should be set on foot. In those same days, Apollinaris, son-in-law of Domitianus, who a short time before had been in charge of Caesar's palace, being sent to Mesopotamia by his father-in-law, inquired with excessive interest among the companies of soldiers whether they had received any secret messages from Gallus which indicated that he was aiming higher. But when he heard what had happened at Antioch, he slipped off through Lesser Armenia and made for Constantinople. But from there he was brought back by the guards and kept in close confinement. Now while these things were happening, attention was drawn at Tyre to a royal robe that had been made secretly, but it was uncertain who had ordered it or for whose use it was made. Consequently, the governor of the province at that time, who was the father of Apollinaris of the same name, was brought to trial as his accomplice, and many others were gathered together from various cities, and were bowed down by the weight of charges of heinous crimes. And now, when the clarions and internal disasters were sounding, the disordered mind of Caesar, turned from consideration of the truth, and not secretly as before, vented its rage. And since no one conducted the usual examination of the charges either made or invented, or distinguished the innocent from association with the guilty, all justice vanished from the courts as though driven out. And while the legitimate defense of cases was put to silence, the executioner, trustee of plunderings, hoodwinking for execution and confiscation of property ranged everywhere through the eastern provinces. These I think it now a suitable time to review, excepting Mesopotamia, which has already been described in connection with the account of the Parthian Wars, and Egypt, which we will necessarily postpone to another time.
Thank you very much.